All right, buckle up for a deep dive. We're about to wade into some murky legal waters today.
Sounds intriguing.
It is, especially because, at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward. We're looking at the case of Dominic Troy down in Louisiana.
Oh, Dominic Troy. I've heard about this one. Drug charges, right.
Yeah, and we've got the whole 9 yards, police reports, court documents, the works. But here's the catch.
Oh, there's a catch.
There is. How can his lawyer possibly fight this?
Well, you piqued my interest now. Give me the rundown. What landed this guy in hot water?
Dominic was cruising down Interstate 10 in a rental car.
Rental car, okay.
Got pulled over, following too closely.
Ah, tailgating. Happens all the time.
Right, but here's where it gets interesting. The officer says he smelled marijuana,
Okay, that changes things.
searches the car, and bam, 5.1 pounds of marijuana in the trunk.
Whoa, 5.1 pounds. That's not exactly a dime bag.
Exactly. So that's the setup. Now let's break it down piece by piece.
All right, let's dive in.
The traffic stop. The report says Dominic was practically glued to the bumper of a box truck. But Dominic's claiming the truck swerved into his lane, forcing him to get close. Could this be a starting point for his defense?
Potentially. Dominic's lawyer could try to paint the traffic stop as what we call pretextual.
Pretextual.
Meaning the officer might have been fishing for a reason to pull him over, already suspicious for some reason, maybe profiling.
So even if Dominic was a bit too close for comfort.
His lawyer could argue the officer was looking for any excuse. Use the tailgating as a cover.
To get to the marijuana.
Exactly. They'd need to really pick apart that police report, though, looking for inconsistencies.
Like what?
Anything that doesn't add up. Were there other cars nearby? What was the traffic like? Was Dominic's driving really that dangerous?
I see, poking holes in the officer's story.
Right. Because if the stop wasn't legitimate, everything that follows is questionable.
Including that whiff of marijuana the officer claims he smelled.
Ah, yes. The marijuana odor. That's tricky.
Tricky how?
Well, the law says odor can be used to establish probable cause for a search.
Makes sense. If you smell weed, chances are.
But it can be subjective. What one person considers a strong odor, another might barely notice. Dominic's lawyer could challenge whether the smell was strong enough to justify a search.
Especially in a moving vehicle.
Right. Windows open, wind blowing, other smells around. It gets complicated. Plus, we're talking about a rental car, not Dominic's personal car.
And Dominic told the officer he was an excluded driver on the rental agreement. Does that make a difference?
It could. His lawyer might argue that because Dominic wasn't supposed to be driving the car, he had a weaker expectation of privacy, which
The
means
search might not hold up in court.
it's a long shot, but it's a point they could raise. It all adds to the overall picture.
Okay, let's say, for argument's sake, the search is considered legal. We've still got this mountain of marijuana, 5.1 pounds. Can Dominic's lawyer realistically argue he had no clue it was there?
That's a tough one, but not impossible. They'd have to create reasonable doubt about Dominic's knowledge and control over the marijuana. Maybe someone else stashed it there.
So the question becomes, whose marijuana was it? Was it truly his?
Exactly. And they'd need evidence to support that claim.
I see. Shifting the focus from Dominic to someone else. But the police report mentions Dominic was acting nervous during the stop, sweating, shaking, rubbing his elbow. Could the prosecution use that against him, say it's a sign of guilt?
Of course they could try, but Dominic's lawyer could counter that. It's perfectly normal to be nervous when you're pulled over by the police, especially if you know you're driving a car you shouldn't be.
Right, and nervousness doesn't automatically equal guilt.
Exactly. They could also point to other possible reasons for his behavior. Maybe he had a medical condition or he'd had a bad experience with police before.
It's all about creating a believable alternative narrative.
Precisely. And that brings us to another interesting detail from the report. Dominic wasn't totally consistent with his answers. First, he said he was visiting his sister in Beaumont. Then later, he said he was on the phone with his brother. Inconsistencies can be tricky. The prosecution loves to jump on those. They'd try to paint him as evasive, lying to cover something up. But his lawyer could argue that he was flustered, got his facts mixed up under pressure.
It seemed like Dominic's lawyer has their work cut out for them.
They do. They'll need to be sharp, creative, and persuasive. Every detail matters in a case like this.
Well, before we get into potential strategies, let's make a closer look at some of the evidence. We've got this property log from the police department. Lists everything they took from Dominic when he was arrested. A black duffel bag.
Presumably that's where they found the marijuana.
Right, but there's also a cell phone, a wallet, some cash, even a partially smoked marijuana cigarette. Could any of this actually help Dominic?
It could, actually. You see, the prosecution might view that cigarette as incriminating, but Dominic's lawyer could flip the script.
How's...
They could push for DNA testing on that cigarette butt.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
If the DNA doesn't match Dominic.
It supports his claim that he wasn't smoking it, and maybe he genuinely was unaware of the marijuana in the car.
Exactly. It's all about planting those seeds of doubt. And that's not all. The cell phone and wallet could also play a role in Dominic's defense.
Really? How? I mean, those seem pretty standard.
Think about it. They could be key to establishing Dominic's whereabouts and actions leading up to the traffic stop.
So like an alibi.
Exactly. Imagine finding texts or calls to his sister on that phone, placing him in Beaumont, just as he initially claimed.
And if there's location data from apps that corroborates his story.
Even better. The phone records could back up his alibi and contradict the officer's suspicion. And don't forget the wallet.
What about it?
Receipts. Think receipts.
Oh, like a paper trail.
Precisely. Maybe even a time-stamped gas station receipt from Beaumont. Proof he was there hours before the arrest.
It's amazing how these little things can become so important.
Absolutely. These seemingly insignificant details could really poke holes in the prosecution's timeline. But let's step back for a moment. Big picture time. Based on what we know so far, is there a realistic chance for Dominic to beat these charges?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It's too early to say for sure. There are definitely avenues for his lawyer to explore, but a lot depends on the strength of the evidence and how it's presented. And of course, we can't forget
The burden of proof.
Exactly. In the U.S. legal system, Dominic is innocent until proven guilty.
Right. The prosecution has to convince a jury that Dominic knowingly possessed that marijuana with the intent to distribute it. And, from what we've discussed, there seem to be some potential weaknesses in their case.
There are. The questionable traffic stop, the reliance on the odor of marijuana, the issue of ownership in a rental car, all of these factors create opportunities for Dominic's lawyer to challenge the prosecution's narrative.
And we haven't even talked about the body camera footage yet. The report mentioned the officer's camera was activated later in the encounter. Could that footage be a game changer for Dominic's defense?
It could be huge. Either way. Imagine the footage shows Dominic being calm, cooperative, genuinely surprised when the marijuana is found.
That would definitely cast doubt on the officer's claims about Dominic's nervous behavior.
And make it harder to prove he knew about the drugs.
But on the other hand,
if the footage shows Dominic panicking or trying to hide something,
that could be pretty damaging.
Very damaging. We'll have to wait and see what that footage reveals. But there's another thing I'm curious about. What if Dominic decides to testify in his own defense? Is that a good strategy?
That's a tough one.
It's a gamble. High risk, high reward.
In what way?
Well, it would allow Dominic to directly address the jury, explain his side of the story, connect with them on a human level. It could really help humanize him, make him more relatable.
But wouldn't he also be subjected to cross-examination by the prosecution?
Absolutely, and that can be brutal. The prosecution would try to highlight inconsistencies in his story, portray him as unreliable.
So it's a tough call.
It is. Ultimately, a decision Dominic and his lawyer will have to make together, weighing the potential benefits against the very real risks. But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
There are a lot of factors at play here.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What stands out to you as the most crucial element in Dominic's potential defense?
I'd say the key lies in building a coherent and believable narrative, one that casts doubt on the prosecution's case.
So it's not just about individual pieces of evidence.
Right. It's about the whole picture. Dominic's lawyer needs to pick apart the inconsistencies, challenge the assumptions, and offer alternative explanations for each piece of evidence.
Like connecting the dots.
Exactly. Creating a tapestry of doubt. If they can create enough uncertainty about Dominic's guilt, the jury might not be able to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the whole game.
It's fascinating, really. All the strategy involved. It sounds like Dominic's lawyer needs to be a master chess player, anticipating the prosecution's moves and countering them.
Spot on. It's a mental game as much as it is a legal battle. Thinking several steps ahead, carefully crafting that narrative. And speaking of strategy...
We've talked about several potential approaches. Which one do you think holds the most promise? What's the best shot for Dominic's lawyer?
It's tough to say for sure. Every case is unique. But I think challenging that initial traffic stop is crucial.
Why so?
If they can convince the court that the stop was pretextual, that the officer didn't have a valid reason...
Then everything that follows is tainted, right?
Exactly. The search, the discovery of the marijuana, it all gets thrown out.
Because it was obtained illegally.
Precisely. It's like saying, you cheated to get this evidence, so you can't use it.
Makes sense. But even if they can't get the stop thrown out completely.
Just raising questions about its legitimacy could plant seeds of doubt in the jury's mind, which is sometimes all it takes.
So it sounds like Dominick's lawyer needs a multi-pronged attack.
Absolutely. Attack the traffic stop, question the search, raise doubts about ownership, and maybe, just maybe, put Dominick on the stand.
Let him tell his story.
It's risky, but it could pay off. Of course, through this whole process, Dominick's lawyer can't forget the human element.
What do you...
They need to present Dominick as a believable person, someone the jury can relate to, someone they can believe.
Because at the end of the day...
It's a human drama playing out in that courtroom.
And stories matter. Facts are important, but they need to be woven into a narrative that makes sense, that resonates.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive has really been fascinating. We started with what seemed like a simple drug bust, but...
It's turned into something much more complex.
It has. It shows how a routine traffic stop can spiral into this intricate legal battle with so much at stake.
And it's a reminder that every case, no matter how straightforward it might appear, has layers, nuances.
Absolutely. We've seen how important it is to challenge assumptions, to scrutinize the evidence, to consider multiple perspectives.
It all goes back to those fundamental principles of our legal system. Due process, the presumption of innocence.
Right. Every person deserves a fair trial, regardless of the charges against them.
Well said. This case has given us a lot to think about. As we wait to see how it all unfolds, I hope our listeners will remember there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Keep an open mind, consider all the evidence, and never stop asking questions.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next week with another intriguing case, ready to explore the world of law and justice. Until then, stay curious and stay informed.